Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. I'll be speaking today with Ike Wilson, retired U.S. Army Colonel, former director of the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute, who once led the Commanders Initiative Group at U.S. Central Command. He writes Compound Security Unlocked on Substack and hosts the Civic Brief as a podcast. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, and the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com. Podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Recently, when Ike and I recorded a previous episode, I led with the fact that I don't talk very much with or about the military on this show, admitting I'd done few episodes on the subject since the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, here we are, less than 2 months later, speaking about it again. We scheduled this one to cover some ground we hadn't gotten to in our previous conversation. My plan that time was to deal with Trump's abuse of the military in the Caribbean and in American cities, and then to dig into some questions that I have about the military, many of which long predate Trump, and many of which fester no matter which party is in power. Our conversation was lively. We covered a lot of ground, but we did not get to those long-standing questions. So we said, we'll schedule another one to do that. And when we did, I did not expect that, as much as there can be a number one story in the Trump era, that actually that story would be Hegseth, a murdered member of the Guard, war crimes, the vet's reminder to refuse unlawful orders, and the reaction that they deserve to die. That in fact, the questions of Trump's abuse of the military are more prominent today than they were 2 months ago. I recently had a conversation with a vet in his 80s, an Ivy League alum who fully believes we are at war with narco-terrorists and that the troops saved the people of DC. So, we'll start again with today's events, and I'm really hoping that we get to that other stuff. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, PhD, is a scholar, a soldier, and as I said, he's a retired U.S. Army Colonel, a strategist whose career spans command, classrooms, and campaigns. He was president of the Joint Special Operations University, director of the U.S. War College Strategic Studies Institute, director of the Commanders Initiatives Group for the Commander U.S. Central Command. He's a former professor and academic, program director at West Point. He founded the West Point Grand Strategy Program. He's taught at Columbia, Yale, George Washington, Arizona State, and the National War College. His honors include Defense Superior Service Medal, Bronze Star Medal. His books include Thinking Beyond War, Letters to the Republic, and Blueprints from the Ashes. He writes, as I said, on Substack, Compound Security Unlocked, and hosts the Civic Brief, a podcast for civic leaders on most major podcast sites. Welcome again, Ike Wilson, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Terrence, it's great to be with you. And again, thank you. A great intro that I hope to live up to one day. What it also reminds me of is I've been on the planet a long time. All right. So very much looking forward to our continued conversation. Like you said in the intro, different verse, same as the first, frankly. I mean, the things that we were kind of talking about and hoping to get to, well, it's almost like time stopped. And those are still the prominent top line, above the fold issues right at the heart of American civil military relations.
Yeah, time stopped and events piled on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the current situations. Let's start with the Caribbean.
Sure.
The most prominent news these days is that I think it just came out just yesterday that the Pentagon's top watchdog group. And this surprised me because I thought they defanged the inspector general so much that this wouldn't even happen. But they concluded that the information that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared in the chat prior to the attack on Yemen had the potential, at least, to put U.S. service members in harm's way and to jeopardize their safety. Any response to that finding and the fact that it came out at all?
To this last point you just made, I mean, I could not agree more. I myself a bit surprised, happily so, that the referees, if you will, the long-established referees inside all of our federal agencies, from the local level all the way up to the national level, right? And that's something that we as citizens need to understand. The federal government transcends. It's more than just DC. It transcends and lives right in our neighborhoods. The fact that with all the gutting that has occurred in the elimination of those referees,
right? Let me just tell people who that is. That's inspector generals, in most of the agencies.
That's
and the JAGs,
Office of General Counsel, and the Judge Advocate Generals.
Most of them fired.
Most of them fired. Many of them, I would say this: most of them fired. All of them chilled. A chilling effect, and that's one of the things we have to understand, that the chilling effect throughout our government. And you may have folks that are still there in those positions, but are they really? They become hollow men, hollow women, because they're chilled from their duty to stand up and speak truth with candor to power.
They fear they may be one forthright statement from firing.
Absolutely, which is the ultimate intended strike, right? Exactly. That's the actual executive attack against the institution. Anyway, surprised like you, Citizen Wilson, surprised right along with you, former soldier Wilson also. Happily so that we still have enough of a Inspector General's office, and that report seems very familiar to the IG reports and investigations that I was very aware of and took part in during my time in service as a licensed practitioner. I thought it was very sober and very candid, frankly, a very candid report. And the report told us exactly what we all knew, but that is a good example of the system having been bent, has not completely broken. The test now will be to see what is adjudicated out of that.
Yes.
Citizen Wilson has no expectation that anything will come out of that report, but still, we must take the good along with the bad and the ugly. And it is important for the American public to know that the report was done. It was done, as far as I can tell, both as citizen and former soldier, done by the book. And most importantly, that it's transparent, that it's put forward. Now let us see, as citizens alike, what comes out of that in terms of justice.
Yeah. And let me just mention two other things which you don't have to respond to. The report also found that Hegseth, as the secretary, had the authority to declassify information.
Sure.
Which means, and his way of defending himself was to say that by saying it, I declassified it. They said that might in fact be true, but the problem that leads to is that there now seem to be two sets of rules.
Correct.
One for leadership and one for everyone else.
That's right, and it violates the norm and the value, if not the rule itself, of transparency and accountability. Right? These things must be recorded. Right? These things must be documented. That's how our federal government works. It's how our polity in our democratic republic works. Right? This adjudication by oral determinations at moment of action, it's not good enough. Right?
No, exactly. Even if it might be the letter of the law.
Correct.
It's not the spirit of
it is nowhere close to the spirit of the law. That's right.
Wise or just reality.
Right. That's right.
I think that's pretty much on that one. So that was Yemen, way back then. That was
there we remember, right? There we remember.
And I just want to remind people what that was. I'm assuming most listeners know but there was a group chat over the insufficiently secure and unauthorized messaging platform Signal
That's right.
prior to the attack on Yemen. And he actually gave specific battle plans in this. And the only reason we as citizens found out about it was that they were so clumsy that they actually included a journalist in their Signal chat.
That's
Okay,
right.
so that's
And
just
and
for
and
any
just
of
to
you who've
put,
forgotten.
yeah, if I could just add, I mean, he put in the chat the H-hour, what we call in the military the H-hour sequence. So he articulated the sequence of events by the minute, and also articulated at a certain time and moment in that mission profile when aircraft would be on target, on time, for time on target strike. That in and of itself extremely dangerous and detrimental to military operations and the pilots and the
Yeah.
service members that are conducting the
Now, by the
operation.
way, Levitt, the press secretary, in her defense in response to this news coming out,
Yeah,
made two statements. One was that there was no classified information delivered because
sure.
of that, and the second was that the operation wasn't compromised. Now, what's interesting is the finding didn't say the operation was compromised.
That's
It
right.
said it could have been, and
Correct.
if you are in harm's way, could have been is just as bad as did. But
Oh,
they grabbed onto the two
well,
things that
they're playing on the backside of a negative outcome,
that's right.
right? Well, there was no problem because nothing bad happened,
Yeah,
right? That's just that doesn't work. That doesn't pass the so-called common sense test, and it certainly
exactly.
doesn't work in military operations.
Exactly. Okay. So now let's move up to the actions in the Caribbean.
And
Uh,
Terrence, the ambiguity that begins with what we just talked about, the gray space ambiguities that begin with what we just talked about, and how that is now setter for where we are now with the operations in and around the Caribbean. I think it's really important
yeah,
to add that.
yeah. I mean, yeah. If you fiddle with the letter of the law, you might be able to get away if people don't
Correct.
really know what's going on,
Yes.
etc. That kind
Yes.
of thing. Now, the latest sort of news was the "kill them all" quote, which was revealed in I think it was a Washington Post article
It was.
by three different journalists. But
Correct.
prior to that, 2 months ago, when you and I spoke, we already were saying they're extrajudicial killings
Yes.
in whatever scenario they play out.
Yes.
If you could somehow justify them as taking place in this war against narco-terrorists,
Hmm.
then they're war crimes. If you cannot justify them as taking place in a war, then they're just murders.
Right. Right.
Um,
And
the,
importantly, we have to adjudicate on two stages: the stage of domestic context and law, and the stage of international law and the law of land warfare, the law of war, as you hear talked about a lot in the mainstream media, and to include international humanitarian law, IHL, right?
right.
Two stages, intersectional.
And I'm going to, since you've just brought up the specific, I'm going to read a quote from
Excellent.
the Department of Defense's Law of War Manual.
Perfect.
And it turns out the two sections that seem to apply to this is 18.3.1 and 18.3.2, I think. But, quote, clearly illegal orders to commit law of war violations, okay? The provision warns the requirement to refuse to comply with orders to commit law of war violations applies to orders to perform conduct that is clearly illegal.
Yep.
And as you and I talked about 2 months ago, there's this lag time.
Very important.
Between a district judge perhaps saying that was against the law and it finally being adjudicated by the Supreme Court potentially, which knowing the Trump administration, almost everything ends up at the Supreme Court where they get the go ahead.
Yeah.
But that lag time would mean that a service member questioning an order would not know ultimately whether it was going to be judged legal or illegal in time to decide. But what's interesting is that in that quote I was just reading from the Law of War manual, when they are going on to cite an example of what would be an illegal thing, it just happens to say, quote, for example, orders to fire upon the ship wrecked would be clearly illegal.
Correct.
It seems to me there's two questions here. They both, as we laid out, end up with a crime. But one is there a justification that this is an action of war? And is it illegal then? And if it's not justifiable that it's an action of war, then it's illegal on other grounds. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, you've laid it out so well, and I'm so glad you went to the Law of War itself in the two subsections of paragraph 18. Boy, oh boy. Again, we have to analyze this at least two different levels, international law and domestic law. And we have to unpack some things. The grayness of this designation. We don't have an authorization to use of military force from Congress. We don't have a declaration of war from the first branch, Congress. We have an articulation from the executive, a part of this executive fiat that we tend to be living under since January of 2025, that has made a self-declaration with no proffered evidence and transparency of how and why and under what conditions they have now determined that this is a quote unquote war from a branch that does not have the power enumerated in the Constitution to do the declaration of the same. All right, this is not a congressional declaration, nor is it even lesser than that an authorization for use of military force. In the defining of this as narco-terrorism, in the designation of these gunboat runners as terrorists. So we have at least 3 or 4 layers of, at a minimum, a semantic problem that becomes very, very important, critically important, legally, ethically, and morally, because it creates multiple layers of ambiguity in terms of what the context is when you have an Admiral Bradley running at the time of the original first strike in question now, the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, the commander in charge of making the determination of striking. The context has been set that this is a war, and that is a war against narco-terrorists. That's the context that the JSOC commander is making his determinations on, from a kill or within. But none of that legally established and constitutionally established by our first branch of government. And so we've had a lot of conversations over the last 2 weeks in the context specifically narrowed to the specific boat and the 2 individuals that survived the first strike, and whether or not in the shipwrecked example in the Law of War made real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be writing feverishly, talk about a tragedy in the making. But we somewhat forgot the larger context of there's a broader grayness here, because we've not determined the legality of this broader operation in the first place. Right?
And let me just read, folks, a couple of things that I actually got from the American Friends Service Committee, who has done a very good job recently. I found one article that was about the deployment in domestic cities. Yes. And it was, kind of an FAQ. Yep. And then this one about the Caribbean killings, again, an FAQ. But here's some quotes. Without explicit congressional approval or an emergency brought about by an attack against the U.S., the president lacks legal authority to carry out unilateral military hostilities that risk a new war.
That's correct.
And despite its name, the War Powers Resolution requires congressional approval for any use of the U.S. military in hostilities. It isn't just saying, as the Constitution already says, that only Congress has the right to declare war, but even using the military in any international hostilities calls for congressional
That is
initiation.
correct. It is an enumerated power, an express power given to the first branch. Congress declares wars. And once the war is declared, that triggers that part of the war power, a shared power through separate institutions. Once Congress declares it, then is when the executive's power as commander in chief trigger into effect. We are seeing an exploitation of this so-called theory of the unitary executive. I will call it an exploitation in practice now. We're not talking about theory of a unitary executive. We're seeing it in power in practice.
Okay, and let me just bring people up to speed on that. The
Please.
unitary executive is this theory that gives the executive much more power, I'm going to say, and I bet you're going to agree with me, than the Constitution grants.
And much more than the founders and framers intended, even in Alexander Hamilton, that in Federalist Paper 70 talked about executive energy. But he was talking about it in the larger context of the need to restrain that power.
Right.
To restrain that power. Right. The
And,
founders and framers, power is restraint.
Exactly. And remember, they had an experience of a king. They did not have an experience of a running democracy.
Correct.
This unitary executive is a theory that's been rolling around the right for at least 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah.
And has found its expression in the current Supreme Court. It
Absolutely.
turns out that Roberts, who passes himself off as the umpire, who makes the occasional siding with the progressives, like on the health care mandate and so on, it's just so that you can't sort of you can't say, well, he's another Alito, he's another Thomas. But when it comes to unitary executive, he is the ringleader.
From day one, it's core to his jurisprudence throughout his career, his professional life. Absolutely.
And I used to say that the main critique of Roberts was that he never met a decision that pitted a corporation against an individual where he didn't vote for the corporation.
Right.
That is also true.
Right.
But only under Trump has his full-throated endorsement of the unitary executive come into play.
That's exactly right.
Since we talked about the War Powers Act, I also want to mention one other thing the American Foreign Service Committee pointed out.
Can I say something real quick on the War Powers? Just real quick on the War Powers Act.
Yes.
War Powers Act 1973, right? One of the main reasons why we have a War Powers Act 1973 is because Congress felt that it needed to take deliberative action to pull back power that it had unwarrantedly delegated and deferred away to the executive, or leaving it on the table so that an imperial presidency could pull that power in.
In other words, they were reclaiming it from Nixon and Kissinger.
Exactly, and it was a tourniquet to stop the bleeding of first branch enumerated express power to the executive. Right. So it still brings us back to a constitution, but by 73, we're already seeing a breach of the Constitution in terms of extra constitutional grabs of power by the executive branch. Exactly.
Right. And it turns out that where the public sees it, where it makes the headlines, is when it comes to war powers. As we know, in Trump too, it's taken the power to spend, the power not to spend. In other words, there's all sorts of domestic things it's taken from the Congress that have yet to be decided. But the one that people finally notice is when it has to do with war and so on.
That's right. But the immunity that comes with that, which the court has ruled on. Right. Yeah.
So here's something which I didn't know that the Foreign Service Committee pointed out. In an attempt to legalize the strikes, the White House and some Republicans in Congress are contemplating a new authorization for the use of military force.
Certainly.
Now, that is a joint resolution passed by Congress to authorize the use of military force, which is what, in a sense, the War Powers Act was. And there was the one after 9/11.
That's right. There were two that came out in the wake of 9/11, and the two authorizations of use of military force lingered, and we did all operations through Afghanistan and Iraq up until I believe 2020, 2021.
And what it does is that particular one, because it was against the war on terror,
Correct.
it's a much flimsier gray area thing than the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act was pretty clear. We're dealing with Vietnam and Cambodia and so on.
Very time and context specific. 60 days of executive employment of force under extremists, and that executive has no more than 60 days to formally report to Congress, so that we can therefore put the War Power Act back into the hands of the first branch. Very, very time specific, very context specific, very narrow in scope, and very much premise on restraining power. Right? The GWAT AUMF is the beginning of the broad blanket of unbridled executive authority.
Yeah, yes, not location specific, and who defines who is a terrorist.
It took the guardrails away, and it's the first steps of this trail towards where we are today, with unlimited immunity to executive authority and executive power, to the point where the executive says it, therefore it is.
That's right. Once you say it's not Cambodia, it's not Vietnam, it's not the Viet Cong, it's terrorist, and the same person who's taking the action gets to decide who's a terrorist.
There's no check and balance there. There's no check and balance there.
And an early draft proposal circulating around Congress for this new authorization of the use of military would, according to the Friends Service Committee, authorize U.S. attacks on as many as 60 countries and open the door to a military invasion of Venezuela.
Yes.
It's a joint resolution, so although 8 caved on the shutdown, I don't think you'd get enough Democrats to cave to make this pass. But just know that that's hanging out there as a possible justification.
And it appears that not only will you not get enough of the Democrats to vote, I truly believe they won't get enough of the Republicans, the centrist Republicans.
It somehow has generated the growth of some spine.
It has. It has. I mean, we've hit rock bottom. We would expect to find some spine at this point, a little bit of spine at this point, but we've really hit rock bottom when we're talking about war crimes.
Yeah.
Right. When we're talking about actions taken that meet the mark of war crimes. With an AUMF, though, it cleans up a bit the domestic legal aspects of this. It makes it easier for this administration to pass some of the legal arguments, the legal tests, because now you would have an authorization coming from the first branch from Congress. It does not clean up any of the larger international law and international humanitarian law,
the laws of war,
and the laws of war. It does not clean that table up at all, because it's you still have to make the case of proportionality. You still have to make the case of self-defense and imminent danger, imminent threat. None of this passes that test.
The number of dots you have to connect to get from an opioid death in Kentucky to a military invasion of Venezuela is way beyond reality.
And also, I mean, this is nuance, but important. You can't the line of the chain of hanging, if you will, is not as clean as the administration is even attempting to make at the moment. You're attacking boats in and around and affiliated with drug cartels, fentanyl drug cartels from Venezuela, but the Venezuelans aren't in the business of fentanyl; they're in the business of cocaine, right? So the mismatch there between cause and effect and justification.
They're depending on ignorance there.
That's correct.
And we don't have time to talk about it, but the obvious thing that puts the lie to all of this is the pardoning of the former Honduran president, convicted after a trial and evidence presented of being a narco dealer, if not a terrorist.
It doesn't pass any of these tests. No. And what it's doing is it's triggering this primordial sense of fear and concern we all share a sense of, hey, we have a drug trafficking problem in the United States, and we have an opioid and a fentanyl problem. No one denies that, but cause effect, even
Yeah,
correlation,
yeah.
it's just not there. But the administration is abusing this sensibility in a way that makes it nonsensical,
Right,
right?
but I will say it follows their pattern, and it's Trump's pattern, skillfully in many cases, of seizing on a true grievance.
Oh yeah.
Right? This is, I
Yes.
mean, his whole career since
Yeah.
2015 is based on seizing on true grievances, making
Yes.
false promises and
That's
usually
right.
false claims that never get delivered on, but work in the
He is
electoral.
a master at the red herring
Right.
and the straw man,
That's right.
right?
So
He is the
this is just
music. That's what the music man does in the old musical, right? I mean, we got a problem in River City, right? And it
yeah.
begins with P and it's pool,
And
right?
the
This
problems are real. Fentanyl's real. Opioid
absolutely.
scourge is real. Let me just tell people this is Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Ike Wilson. He's a retired U.S. Army Colonel. I gave a lot of his ranks and
Yeah,
honorifics
we
the
don't do
first
that again.
time around. I don't do that again. He writes Compound Security Unlocked on Substack and hosts the Civic Brief podcast. I want to just get a quick hit from you
Yeah,
about the two other events domestically. One, the uh, veterans, office holders like Mark Kelly, intelligence agency former employees,
mhm.
but basically experienced within government veterans and their reminder, warning,
Yeah.
caution about refusing illegal orders. Your response on that?
Well, I'll start at the end of my response and work backward. The end of the response is they were right, right? Lo and behold, the justification for giving those reminders and those forewarnings more than justified, because look where we are in and off the shores of Venezuela, in the Eastern Pacific and across the Caribbean, right? There is a necessity to remind the force and the nation behind the force that you not only do you not have to follow and execute illegal orders, you're obligated to stand up against them. And one of the six in that social media spot actually said the latter of what I just said, that you're obligated to disobey
Right,
an illegal,
must.
you must disobey an illegal order, right? So backing up from there, the whole administration and the president's response of judging that as acts of sedition and therefore punishable by death, and calling for the hanging of these public servants, all of them, as I recall, they're all serving congresspersons. So
Did
there's a
office
whole other
holders.
aspect to this which hasn't been talked about a lot. Not only are they justified in making that reminder, but they're obligated as members of Congress, the first branch, in terms of their responsibilities, enumerated express powers of the Constitution as congresspersons and their role in the war power, in the declaration of the thing. There's a misnomer across the nationhood that things dealing with war and warfare are only tied to the executive as commander in chief. Again, the war power is like all power in America. It's a shared power through separate institutions. The Congress has a portion of the war power. The executive has a portion of the war power to execute faithfully the law, commander in chief role, and even adjudication, that business lag adjudication through the third sort of power in the judiciary. But
Yeah.
the first primary power to declare, and part of declaration is to redeclare what our roles and responsibilities are as service members, do's and don'ts, lies with the first branch, firstly, Congress and those congresspersons. So not only was that not an act of sedition, it was an act of duty,
Right, I got it. I got
constitutional
it.
obligation. It's very important that we understand that. I've been a little dissatisfied with the poverty of main media's coverage of that, and I honestly think it just comes from a genuine, honest unknowing
Yeah,
of those nuances of how our Constitution works. Right?
yeah, exactly. And to some extent, I think habit. You know,
Yeah, and habit, exactly. And frankly,
right.
to the degree that we've allowed our whole political process to become polluted
Yeah,
with partisan tribalism. And
right.
so even the most dutiful act carries with it the high potential for the other to judge it as a partisan political action
That's
when
right.
when it's actually an action that's based on duty, right? So we've really polluted the space, and that's something that we the people have to clean up,
Yeah,
so that our duly elected representatives have a cleaner space to actually perform their duties in a more transparent place, so we can actually judge the purpose behind their actions as
right.
well as the purpose behind their non-actions, right?
And I am certain that that chilling effect we talked about applies to elected representatives as well. And the
I
chill is what will happen in the primary if
Yes.
I do the right thing.
I would say this with our current administration, um, always look for the chilling impact as the main strike. All right, and even in this case, the chilling effect of stating in Truth Social, his Truth Social stream, acts of sedition punishable by death. The real assault there is the chill effect that it puts across all of Congress, across the force itself, across the service member force, across all of our joint armed services, right? Across the JAG Corps, the Judge Advocate General Corps, the Office of General Counsel, all those referee agencies. The chilling effect was like, ooh, I may be legally right in stating and speaking truth with candor to power, but I still might lose my pension. I still might be brought back on active duty to be put under UCMJ and at least reduced in rank in pension, if not sent to prison, or if people believe that this is a moment of war and an act of sedition, put before a firing squad, right? I mean, this is
Yeah,
real stuff, and the real attack is the chill. The
yeah.
real attack is the chill.
Okay. On the domestic side, again, a member of the National Guard has
Mm,
been killed,
yeah,
another wounded.
yeah,
My sense of this, while that is a horrible, terrible thing,
yeah,
that Trump put them in harm's way
yes,
as an act not of crime control or safety, but as an act of intimidation
yeah.
and provocation. I feel as if he has blood on his hands, and this has been, you and I talked about it last time, what I've been most afraid of: the provocation, the alleged justification at some point of the Insurrection Act,
Sure.
and the role that could play in neutering the 2026 elections.
I
Okay.
couldn't agree with you more. Purposeful performativeness. It's purposeful because it's performative, because it's putting those National Guard soldiers in the wrong space, in the wrong context, at the wrong times. And part of that performance is purposeful because it's setting conditions for, I think, probably, Terrence, as we talked about 2 months ago, this, something like this was bound to happen. It's set piece. And now you have to start thinking about, in a non-conspiratorial way, but just in a logical, follow the trail kind of way, what what kind of pretext this sets up for then a condition state that now can be cast as, well, now we have cause to react, which will always be an overreaction. And now already the call for more troops, even in spite of the courts saying do not pass go. And in this case, even the call for 500 more troops from West Virginia, the state
That
of the
lost its,
in,
yeah,
that lost the guardsmen, and has one still in critical condition.
yeah,
This could be, and I believe is, part of a plan towards setting a condition state of real or fabricated. And at once we get there, it won't matter. We won't be able to distinguish between the two, of a condition state calling for and justifying triggering of the Insurrection Act, a normalization of the situation, and martial law. That could lead to postponement of midterm elections, and now we're fully into a liberal democracy.
Right, and the Supreme Court yesterday accepted the Texas
Oh yeah,
gerrymandering, even though the
yeah,
district court, with the decision written by a Trump-appointed judge, had
yes,
found that, and there were numerous quotes. It was very clear that the people pushing for the gerrymander were saying it would eliminate black and brown
yes,
districts. And yet
yes,
the Supreme Court said, we're going to ignore that
yes,
and say that
yes.
it's not. I want to jump to the other issues. So,
Okay.
your thoughts on morale within the military? You've been out of the military for how many years now?
Well, I retired 2017. How many years is that?
Eight, eight.
8 years. I'm in my
But
8th year. Yeah, but I still, I'm still
you're
very
very
much
much in
engaged.
touch with and so on.
Right. I do a lot
So,
of work, do a lot of advisory consulting work with the
so
Department of
what I would
Transportation.
ask
Yeah.
here, Ike, in this question about morale,
Yeah.
is pre-Trump and during and now. In other words, my guess is that there may or may not have been morale issues prior to Trump. Uh, you know, but and so a little bit about that sort of background, and then the current situation.
It's tough. And again, I'll caveat this. This is my sense. This is my
Right.
sense. It's an informed sense. It's a current informed sense, but it's my sense nonetheless. Um, I think we have a drop in the aggregate in terms of morale because of the ambiguity of the situations. I mean, to just put it, at the most broad and general sense, there's an ambiguity because there's a question of what is legally right and morally and ethically correct, right? And it seems to be changing by the day. And anytime you get a situation, particularly with a democracy, where all determinations of what is and what isn't, and what is right, good, bad, and ugly, and right or wrong, when it necks down to one party, one chamber of or institution of government, and in this case, one performative individual, that makes the situation extremely brittle. And now morale and sense of identity and purpose and value of myself as a service member and what I'm serving, use and utility as an instrument of force for the nation's power purposes. It makes it very brittle and very unstable. That's where the morale sits.
Mm-hmm.
I think in many quarters you're going to find in our military today many that would say it's high morale, but my concern is based on what conditionality.
Right. You
If
mean
if we
we're
have a
sort of
force,
thinking, if
if
are
we
we
have
thinking they're gung ho?
correct in this abusive language of, well, we're now more warrior lethal. We've brought an increased warrior lethality, right? And so we're painting it, particularly in the younger generations of the force. It could be feeding this, married with this idea of hyper masculinity, right? This false faux bro type of masculinity and equating that to what it means to be a soldier and what soldiering means. Less about soft power, right? More about kinetic, pipe hitting, kill them all,
Yeah,
these
Fight
types
Club in
of
a
things.
uniform.
That is correct. I think the morale challenge that is a cleaner one to adjudicate on lies with the officer corps
Right.
and in the mid to senior ranks of the officer corps.
So both
Um,
older, most senior, more senior, both in age and rank.
Age and rank and experience, and they've experienced being a service member and a soldier for nation through different administrations across the political red, blue, purple, in the middle spectrum, and having context. And I think morale is challenged among them because they feel the tension and they feel the brittleness. I think my main worry is with the younger generation, the soldiers themselves, the soldiers, the service members, the sailors, those young folks, because they're now more prone to the hyperbole of what it means to be a sailor or a service member to the republic.
That's right.
And
It's
it and
interesting. If I may cut in, it's interesting that
yeah,
when
please.
Hegseth gave his speech at Quantico,
Yeah,
um, that audience would have probably reacted very differently had it been recent recruits versus
absolutely.
the
Well, I'll
leadership.
I'll draw the parallels. I was thankful the soberness that you saw among all the executive leadership, 1 star to 4 star in the room, soberness. Juxtapose that to several months prior, Fort Bragg, now once again Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Fort Liberty, um, and the response that was received for all this hyperbole and this what I call faux bro,
Yeah,
false
yeah,
masculinity, kill them all kind of context and texture from the young soldiers, right, who are very young and green in their upbringing and their socialization to what it means to be a soldier of a democratic republic, not just an armed so-called warrior and a killing machine, right?
right.
This is the degradation of the profession and the professional ethic and ethos that we were talked a bit about in our last session. That's the thing that worries me the most. We
I
could
get
have
it.
a problem of high morale on the wrong grounds. High
Exactly.
morale in the context of an illiberal
Right.
democracy.
Right.
That's the thing that we have to
By
keep
the
our
way,
eyes open.
can you talk a bit about the role of Christian nationalism,
Mm.
racism, misogyny, homophobia within the ranks?
Well, I mean, the thing to understand about our military, right? We live in a democratic republic. It's ours.
Yep.
They are ours. The thing to understand is that they are the best of us, but they are a reflection. They hail from society, and so don't we should not expect too much for our service members to be different than and better than what where the rest of us and where they hail from. So the same types of isms that you just laundry listed out, Terrence, is something that comes part and parcel with them from greater society into the ranks. As the motto goes in the Army, I'll focus on the Army. I know them best. Be all you can be, and I add to it for nation, not self. Right, like the really to what end point. We try to make them better. We build a discipline in, and we build a context in. It's part of the leader development process, and human development. We hope that they go back when they leave the service back as better than they came, and it's a melting pot, if you will, if we still want to use that term, or blended mix. There's a reason why our military um, dedicates itself to representation sociologically across the entire country, so that people that join the military, we live across all these divides. Women and men working together, black, brown, every other color across the spectrum. We're all Americans. And when you do hard things together, if you're looking for American communitarianism and civicness, look to your military, because doing hard things and hard challenges bring people together. It not only unifies, but it unites. You go through crucibles together. But
Let me cut in for one.
all those isms are still they still lie there. Please
Yeah,
go
let
ahead.
me just cut in for a second and say that the thing that I noted in our previous conversation was that on the one hand, the military is the most lethal
Yeah,
of us, but it's also the most cooperative.
correct, correct. Lethal for cause, lethal for purpose, lethal as last resort.
But
Right?
only successful because of the communitarian
Correct,
day to day
correct. And
life
when
of
you
the.
there are no gated communities within the military. There are huge gates between the military and the society, but within the military, we've dedicated ourselves as an institution, as an enterprise, and as professions, armed service professions, to break down those barriers. We are compelled for cause greater than ourselves to work together, and that old moniker that is tried and true through blood and treasure loss. At the end of the day, the service member fights for the person to their left and their right,
Yeah.
right? And you get over all these other separating isms. The problem I have with our current administration, and particularly our current um, Secretary of Warfare.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go a little further than me. I know
Yeah.
he wants to
Yeah.
be called the
Yeah.
Secretary of War, but I'll say, okay, you're the Secretary of Warfare, and you might just be the Secretary of War Crime, right? The problem I have with that is this faux bro, this faux warrior lethality, and instead of uniting the force um, towards its pluralistic, multicultural destiny and destinations, it's dividing and conquering.
Right.
And that's
Within
where
the
all the
force.
and that's where all the anti-DEI comes in, all
Yep.
the anti-trans.
Yep.
Right around the corner will be anti-LGBTQ
You know
plus
what's
writ
so
large.
crazy? What's so
Yeah.
crazy is that it was the military that um,
the Institution for Social Experimentation for breaking down all these barriers for society.
That took us into racial integration.
That's correct.
It was the
That's
military
correct.
that led that.
A lot of times, hindsight's 2020, and then we make it 2010, but when we put the rose-colored glasses on, right? So, the executive order by Truman, there was some heartfeltness there and altruism, but most of it was practicalities in economics. We needed them. We needed the recruitment numbers. We had a retention problem. And so let's just be pragmatic and sober about the cause. I mean, we'll be there again, right? One of the things I've already been writing about and talking about is all these isms that are being manipulated to divide, to frankly create a MAGA America that is homogenized to a white male, patriarchal Christian nationalist America.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in all these wars that you're starting in the faux notion that you're creating peace around the world, you're not going to have the multicultural service members, the force, to actually cover all those bets.
Right.
Because
right.
eventually, all those
saying,
that you're saying the nation's no longer yours. Well, we're going to go back, and we're already seeing elements of it going back to the time of the Vietnam period, where I know my community, the Black American community, my grandparents and even my parents to a certain degree who served in the military would say, well, coming out of the Vietnam experience, the military, the Army is no place for a Black man or a Black woman. It becomes a national security problem.
That's
Terrence,
right.
Because this homogenization of America to one type for one, it's going to make the nation more brittle, and it's we're going to have a national security problem because you're not going to be able to muster the recruitment and retention to protect and defend the Constitution and the nation behind it. We're going to start asking the logical question. Well, why should I go and die for a country when everyone's telling me that it's conditionally at best my country?
Right. So
we have put ourselves on that path, and that worries me to no end.
Okay. The last big double-sided question.
Okay.
How do you assess the quality of our military?
Yeah.
And have we won a war since World War II?
Yeah. Oh boy. My gosh. We got another hour, Terrence?
No, we got like 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Quality. In terms of instrumentality of the force, what the military does to fight and win America's wars, to protect and defend. I'll stick to the fight and win piece. Quality wise and instrumentality, never better.
Right. Not
never
just the best
better
in the world, but the
not
best
only
ever.
in the 250 year history of the United States, but in the history of humans on planet Earth. Right. Qualitatively, in terms of purpose of the thing, the to what ends piece, I worry. I think we have a dangerous situation, a very brittle force, as brittle as the nation it hails from and it serves. Mm-hmm. Right. And we go back to the things we were talking about. Right. Our common unity, being unified towards a unity on the five credos of being an American and the American dream. We don't agree on what egalitarianism means. We don't agree on the purpose and intent of individualism and laissez-faire, right? We don't agree on those things. We are at least two separate Americas, right? Being driven by an administration more towards separateness than towards, we have different ideas on where our sense of what liberty is, where it needs to take us, right? What everyone has their own liberty.
To what end?
We are not passing the to what end test. America and Americans have always, at the birthright that our founders and framers and everyone in between then and now have fought and bled and died for. It's a privilege and a license to all of us as Americans to disagree on the how of policy, how we get from A to B, how do we get to better healthcare, better economy for all, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that's always brought us together is a common sense of liberty as a unifying action and a motivation, a fire that moves us towards a unified destination on the to what ends. of late, and I would say over the last 10 years, an accelerated rate, we are being divided and dividing ourselves and allowing ourselves to be divided on the two what ends, on the core ends. We're not unified on those, and we're not having the conversations to determine to what degree we are genuinely divided on them or being manufactured into a faux division. And I think it's more the latter than the former, but we are still in a dangerous situation, and our military reflects that. We should not expect our military not to reflect any of that brittleness that we see in greater society. We place a lot of underinformed hope in the military riding in on a white horse to save us and save democracy. That's not going to happen. We, the people, must save our military.
Right.
We must save our first responders. We must save our policing forces,
But
and get them back to protect and serve. Right?
Since we're about to end
yeah.
that second part of that question, though, we didn't win Vietnam. We didn't win Iraq. We didn't win Afghanistan. We may have won Grenada. What is going on? We spend more than the next 7 countries combined. We have, nothing. I mean, the money that Congress votes is never seriously questioned. The military doesn't pass an audit.
That's right.
But we don't win. How does that feel to someone like you?
Well, because we define a win, and we've defined the win very poorly and very lazily. A win is a transparently declared outcome. Let's call it a relative peace objective as we can come to know it, and as long as we can sustain it legitimately through force for power purposes. A limited end, and then a calibrated ways and means to include use and utility of military force married with diplomatic force, economic force, informational force, right? That gives you a balanced war policy, and it's limited. It's all about, again, that thing we talked about at the beginning of today's program. It's about restraint. We have not been restrained. We've been restrained in our investments in what we've put to our so-called wars, but we've been completely unbounded and unrestrained in defining a limited left and right expectation of what we want coming out of it. So we go into Iraq with a very anemic, lean force, mostly military, very little diplomatic and political and economic,
and incompetent where it was.
And wrongly calibrated and
Bremer had no experience to do what he was doing.
Exactly. But in unbounded, if we go back and look at the stated goal, a Jeffersonian, almost like a Jeffersonian Democratic Republic of Iraq. Please, this is where you get into the endless wars, because we never get war right. War is a process towards an end. We don't talk about the end state enough and reverse engineer whether or not a use of force is even necessary to achieve the end state goal, towards what end. Instead, we plan our ways into a fight. And so I've written a lot about this. I've spent my whole adult life, frankly, and certainly my professional career, dealing with this and trying to ring the clarion bell on this. The so-called American way of war, and I think it's a broader Western societal problem. The American way of war isn't. The American way of war is a way of battle. We've narrowcasted and limited our sense of what constitutes war to war fighting, into this now faux warrior lethality. It's about capture, kill, and use of lethal force. And you can't kill your way into legitimacy. There's no such thing as a decisive battle, right? We talked a little bit about this the last time. This idea of the glorious decisive battle where lethal use of military force wins the day, and then there's, then we went into Iraq, and then we wait to be greeted with flowers, right? No, you're getting met with IEDs, improvised explosive devices, right? Because now the real phases of any war policy, the decisive phase is who's going to govern next, legitimately, and whose question does that belong to? Not the United States as an external intervener and invader. It lies with the Iraqi people.
Right? I think I got to bring it to a close, but see if I'm right on this.
Yeah.
If you start with the questioning of the ends,
correct.
If you are rigorous on what you hope to achieve, and work backwards from that to the role the military would play in
That's
that.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
We wouldn't have lost all these wars because
I would say, the best example of this modern is Gulf War One,
yes,
because interestingly enough, the now late Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense at the time, everyone can look it up, Google it, the most brilliant and elegant articulation of a limited war based in premise first and foremost on limited aims and ends in states, and therefore very specific limited ways and means of conduct of the war, right? A very balanced war policy to the point where we stopped ourselves from invading into Iraq. That's a limited war, right? In the articulation coming from none other than Dick Cheney, who was on the other side of an unbounded war
on
just
Iraq.
A few years later on Iraq
Yeah,
2.
later.
Iraq
And as you say, what we showed in the 1991
correct
one was restraint.
Exactly. And that's what our our country is about. If there's one lesson I want our nation to take away in this birthday year, 250th birthday year, is power is all about restraint. It's restraining power. And if you ask me what I believe national security in this global environment is about, it's about legitimacy. Legitimacy, when you look for the win in legitimacy, and the legitimacy comes in that balance between end, ways, and means.
Great.
To what end? No, thanks for the opportunity.
We're gonna bring it to a close there. So, Ike's books are Letters to the Republic and Blueprints from the Ashes. The Substack is Compound Security Unlocked. The podcast is the Civic Brief. For this conversation and many other interviews, articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerenceMcNally.net, TerenceMcNally.net, or a world that just might work.com. To the same website if you want to get my weekly announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and 10 or 15 links to relevant, timely articles. Email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast at my site or at all of those, all major podcast sites. You'll find years of podcasts. The archive goes back into the hundreds. Naomi Klein, Michael Lewis, Robert Reich, Van Jones, Bill McKibben, etc., etc. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Ike Wilson, and keep up your good work.
Thank you so much, Terrence, for Nation Not Self.